Ask most Americans about the Pennsylvania Dutch. You'll hear the same three words: horse and buggy. A quiet, quaint people. Amish farmers in plain clothes, black carriages passing gift shops in Lancaster County. Frozen in time, by choice. But that picture is almost entirely wrong. Their history is written into their DNA. In the spring of 1778, soldiers marched into Germantown, Pennsylvania. Their target was Christopher Sauer II. He was 57 years old. He was an elder of the German Baptist Brethren, a pacifist religious group. And he was one of the richest men in the colony. Sauer wasn't a spy. He wasn't armed. He was a publisher whose faith forbade him from swearing any oath. That included the new oath of loyalty to revolutionary Pennsylvania. For that, the state branded him a traitor. On the night of May 25th, 1778, soldiers arrested him in his own home. Sauer wrote down what happened next in his own words. His account survives in his letters and in the Journal of the Brethren Life. "Then they striped me naked to the skin, and gave me an old shirt and breeches so much torn that I could hardly cover my private parts, then cut my beard and hair, and painted me with oil colors red and black, and so led me along barefooted and bareheaded in a very hot sunshiny day. They marched him barefoot through the heat. While he was in custody, the state seized everything he owned: his printing house, his paper mill, and thousands of freshly printed Bibles. An estimated $150,000 fortune. Gone. Sold at public auction. He was allowed to keep one suit of clothes and his glasses. Sauer never recovered. He died a broken man in 1784. His family wasn't nobody either. His father, Christopher Sauer I, printed the first Bible in a European language anywhere in the American colonies. That was in 1743 in German, 40 years before an English Bible was printed here. This was one of the most educated, most literate communities in early America, and it still wasn't enough to protect them. It's a devastating story on its own, but it's also the surface of something much bigger. Sauer's people were called Anabaptists. That name means something specific. They baptized adults, not babies. At the time, that was seen as dangerous and radical. These were tight-knit communities across German Pennsylvania. They married almost entirely within their own group. And when geneticists studied their blood, they found something that shouldn't exist, not by any normal rule of genetics. Here's what they found. The Hutterites are a radical Anabaptist group. They share deep historical and religious roots with the Pennsylvania Dutch, and nearly 30% of Hutterites carry a specific genetic marker. Scientists call it mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. It passes down only from mother to child, generation after generation, almost never changing. The exact version found in Hutterites has a name: haplogroup X2C1. That number means nothing until you hear the next one. In the Hutterites' actual homeland, Switzerland, Tyrol, southwestern Germany, that same marker shows up in less than 1% of people. 30% here. Less than 1% there. In genetics, that's not a small gap. That's a scream. A population's DNA is supposed to roughly match the region it came from. It doesn't just become 30 times more common by accident. Something happened. Something concentrated one rare genetic thread into nearly a third of an entire people. And geneticists still don't fully agree on what that something was. To understand why that's even possible, you need to understand who these people actually were. And for 300 years, we've been calling them by the wrong name. Mitochondrial DNA passes down only through mothers. It moves from mother to daughter, unbroken, for thousands of years. It sits permanently in your cells and almost never changes. So when a rare version of it suddenly shows up everywhere, it means something. It means nearly everyone's mother's mother's mother traces back to a tiny handful of women. That's called a founder effect. It happens when a population shrinks so small that a few individuals end up as the ancestors of almost everyone who comes after. It only happens when a group gets violently, drastically small. The name Pennsylvania Dutch gets in the way of the truth. These weren't people from the Netherlands. Dutch is a corruption of Deutsch, the German word these settlers used for themselves. English speakers just weren't listening very closely. 300 years later, we're still saying it wrong. Most of them came from one specific corridor. It's called the Palatinate, a region in southwestern Germany. Nearby parts of Switzerland, Alsace, and Baden-Württemberg sent people too. And they weren't one people either. They split into two very different worlds. The plain people, Amish, Old Order Mennonites, Hutterites, Brethren, practiced strict separation from the outside world. They made up only 5 to 10% of the colonial population. The other 90 to 95% were church people, German Lutherans and German Reformed families. They built towns, ran schools, and produced elaborate art. The tourist industry kept the 5% and erased the rest. They didn't leave Europe because life was comfortable, either. French armies burned the Palatinate to the ground between 1688 and 1697. The brutal winter of 1708 to 1709 froze rivers and destroyed entire harvests. On top of it all, both Catholic and Protestant rulers hunted Anabaptists as heretics. This is where the genetics start to make sense. Everything changes once you see exactly how small and how targeted these communities became. And targeted is not an exaggeration. Anabaptists rejected infant baptism. They rejected state control over religion. Both Catholic and Protestant rulers treated that as a capital crime. A 1660 chronicle called Martyr's Mirror documents thousands of executions in brutal detail. Believers were drowned in horse troughs, a mocking third baptism. Others were burned at the stake, their tongues clamped shut so they couldn't preach to the crowd. One account has survived for over 450 years. In 1569, in the Netherlands, an Anabaptist named Dirk Willems escaped from prison. He fled across a frozen river. The guard chasing him broke through the ice. Willems turned back and pulled his own captor out of the freezing water. He was recaptured anyway. He was burned at the stake weeks later. That is the environment that built the bottleneck, the population crash that concentrates rare DNA. Not gradual decline. Generations of state-sanctioned killing aimed at wiping these communities out. Only the ones who fled far enough, or hid deep enough, survived to pass anything on. When geneticists try to explain the X2C1 puzzle, 3 explanations usually come up. The core research is a 2010 study in the European Journal of Human Genetics. It was led by geneticist Irene Peichler and her team. They mapped Hutterite ancestry using DNA passed down through mothers and through fathers. The first explanation is the simplest. In 1755, Austria's Habsburg rulers crushed the Hutterite community in Transylvania, a region in what's now Romania. The population collapsed to just 67 survivors, living in a single settlement. This theory says one of those few surviving women carried the rare X2C1 mutation in her mitochondria, her mother line DNA. Through strict intermarriage and rapid growth, that one lineage was amplified. Today it shows up in over 440,000 descendants. It fits the historical record perfectly. Population collapses to a few dozen people in Transylvania are documented fact. But it has one enormous hole. Scientists have searched the regions these people supposedly came from, Tyrol, Switzerland, and never found this mutation there. The original source simply isn't there. So Theory 1 doesn't fully hold. Scientists searched for the smoking gun and found an empty room instead. And there are 2 more theories to go. The second explanation points towards something stranger. Some geneticists think early Anabaptists hid from persecution in remote alpine valleys. There, they may have intermarried with small, isolated communities that predate the Germanic tribes. Those communities may have carried the X2C1 marker, and then they vanished from the modern gene pool entirely, wiped out over the centuries by industry and migration. It's an elegant theory. It explains a real local source for the marker instead of an unexplained mutation. But there's a problem. Scientists have searched those same alpine valleys. They've never found any trace of X2C1 there either. The lost source population this theory depends on may never have existed at all. The third explanation is perhaps the most disorienting of all. Haplogroup X, the broader genetic family that X2C1 belongs to, shows up in strange, scattered pockets around the world. Among the Druze in the Middle East, in the Caucasus, in Scotland's Orkney Islands, and among certain Native American groups like Algonquian-speaking people. This theory argues X2C1 isn't a recent European story at all. It's the remnant of an ancient, highly mobile lineage, one that moved through Ice Age populations long before any migration we normally talk about. It's the most tantalizing explanation of the three. It's also the one modern genetics rejects most firmly. The Native American branch of haplogroup X and the European branch are separated by thousands of years of mutation. Genetically, direct recent contact between them is close to impossible. So, three theories, three respected explanations, published and debated by real scientists. Not one of them fully closes the case. The X2C1 puzzle remains officially unsolved. This mystery reaches far beyond the Hutterites. It's really about how much of human history is still hiding, unread, inside our own blood. Three theories down, and the paradox is still open. That's genetics. Real answers take real time. If you want the next mystery when it's ready, subscribe to DNA Detect. Geneticists have a name for populations like the Pennsylvania Dutch and their Anabaptist relatives. Living time capsules. For centuries, these communities married within their own group. They also kept careful records. Together, that did something rare. It preserved the genetic signature of their 1700s founders. That kind of clarity almost never survives in a modern mobile population. In one major study, researchers analyzed DNA from Old Order Amish men across Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. They looked at the Y chromosome, DNA passed only from father to son. The study covered 98% of all Amish households in the county. The result? The entire modern population, tens of thousands of people, traces back to just 27 male founders who arrived in the mid-1700s. That same closed gene pool has a darker side, too. One example, a mutation in the CFY gene, which helps control the immune system. That mutation is over 4,500 times more common in the Old Order Amish than in the general European population. It comes from a founder group of only 80 to 100 people, and a fatal brain disorder called Amish microcephaly, traced across 9 generations, leads back to a single 1700s couple. 27 men, a single couple, 80 to 100 people. Over and over, the math tells the same story, a population forced down to almost nothing, then rebuilt entirely from within. This is exactly why journals like Human Genetics keep studying these communities. A population this closed and this well-documented almost never exists anywhere else in the modern world. That same isolation is now rewriting their name entirely. And now the history gets stranger still. The popular image of the Pennsylvania Dutch is a pure German farming people. That turns out to be almost as wrong as the horse and buggy caricature. Researchers checked roughly 30,000 ship records from 1727 to 1776. They compared the surnames against known German Jewish name lists. Nearly 12,000 of those immigrants carried surnames that closely matched Sephardic Jewish names. Sephardic Jews are families descended from Jews forced out of Spain and Portugal centuries earlier. A large wave of Jewish families had settled in Switzerland and southwestern Germany. Many converted. Then they moved to Pennsylvania alongside their Anabaptist and Protestant neighbors. This left a mark on the gene pool that oral history never recorded. There's another thread. For generations, families across Pennsylvania and the American South used an odd, unofficial label. They called it Black Dutch. It explained relatives with dark hair, dark eyes, and dark skin. Those features didn't fit the expected picture. The popular explanation was vague. Maybe Spanish blood. Maybe just a name people liked. The documented history is far more specific, and it splits in two directions depending on where you look. In Pennsylvania, the original Black Dutch were very likely Sinti families. German Romani people, an ethnic minority group in Europe. They moved from the Rhine region starting in the 1720s. They took German last names to hide who they were and avoid persecution. Further south, the same label meant something else entirely. Cherokee and Creek families called themselves Black Dutch, too. They used it to get around racial land laws and to dodge forced removal during the Trail of Tears. Modern DNA testing confirms the split. Northern families with Black Dutch oral tradition usually test as purely European, or Sinti. Southern families with the same family story often carry real, low-level Native American and African ancestry. Same words, but two different peoples, two different survival strategies, and one shared need to hide inside a safer identity. The Pennsylvania Dutch were a mix: persecuted Anabaptists, hidden Jewish families, disguised Romani migrants, and, in some branches, people escaping American racial law. All folded into one name that history flattened into German farmers. Picture it. You are standing on the deck of the Concord in 1683. You're one of 13 families fleeing a continent that tried to drown you, burn you, and starve you out of existence. Behind you sits a century of executions, a frozen decade, an army that turned your home to ash. Ahead of you, an ocean, and a colony that doesn't even know what to call you yet. Now, picture your grandchildren, 3 generations later. They're beaten in a Pennsylvania schoolyard for speaking the only language they've ever known. Now, picture your descendants, 250 years after that. They're spitting into a plastic tube in their kitchen and watching a rare mutation, buried in their DNA, reveal a story their own family forgot how to tell. Which brings us back to Christopher Sauer II, stripped, painted, marched barefoot through Germantown, all for refusing to swear an oath his faith wouldn't allow. Now you know why that oath mattered so much. Sauer wasn't just one stubborn man. He was a product of that same Anabaptist world. That world's theology of nonviolence and separation shaped these communities for generations. It kept them marrying within themselves, fleeing together, surviving together. Those same forces built the founder effect into his community's DNA, and they shaped the convictions that cost him everything in 1778. It wasn't a simple story even then either. Some Pennsylvania Dutch, like the frontiersman Conrad Weiser, lived among the Mohawk Nation. He was formally adopted by them as a teenager. He became a key go-between for colonial powers and native nations. That peace lasted for decades. Then it collapsed under a land grab called the Walking Purchase of 1737. Nothing about this history sits still long enough to be simple. And that same biological isolation, the thing state violence forced onto these communities for 300 years, has become something almost nobody could have predicted. A gift back to the rest of us. In Burna, Indiana, researchers studying the Old Order Amish found a mutation in the SERPINE1 gene. It cuts a specific protein in half. It extends the average human lifespan by a full decade, from 75 years to 85. and it offers near-total protection from type 2 diabetes. That discovery is now the basis of an experimental drug called TM5614. It's already in global clinical trials. The goal is to bring those same benefits to the rest of humanity. Researchers are targeting diabetes, obesity, and the wear and tear of aging itself. The isolation forced on Christopher Sauer's community by persecution, the same isolation captured in that impossible genetic marker, is now being studied in research labs worldwide, all in the search for a longer, healthier human life. So, the Pennsylvania Dutch were never the simple, sealed-off, horse and buggy people we were sold. They were never even a single bloodline. They survived some of the bloodiest religious persecution in European history. Their own name was a mistranslation. Their oral traditions were dismissed for 2 centuries, and now their DNA has backed up nearly all of it. Their story isn't a one-off. It's a preview of something bigger. Modern genetics keeps finding the same pattern, group after group. There is no clean, simple version of anyone's ancestry. Every settled story is a story someone simplified for comfort. It gets laid on top of a reality that was always messier, older, and tougher than the myth. And the language itself never actually died. Despite decades of forced assimilation, Deutsch, Pennsylvania German, is still spoken by an estimated 400,000 people in 2025. That makes it one of the fastest-growing minority languages in North America. High birth rates in plain communities keep it alive. So does a new wave of secular descendants, reclaiming it through classes and social media. It remains a living language, not a museum piece. The Pennsylvania Dutch were never just what we thought they were, and neither, it turns out, is anyone else.